Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 30th of September. Today we're going to be doing a frontline update, and I do want to focus today on some territorial changes. We're going to begin by looking at the Donetsk city axis because there are a few things here that I have not found the time to update, and I want to make you guys aware of some adjustments to the map. Some of them are recent and other ones are ones that I've been meaning to discuss for a while now. But let's begin with Novomikhailivka, where I don't really have any significant changes, but what I will add is that the Ukrainians definitely have controlled for a long time now the fields to the north of the village. So I've adjusted the map to indicate that, and the Russians have further control in the fields and the forest plantations to the east of the village. And just to give you guys a reminder about this village, Novomikhailivka, this is a village that's been held by elements of the 79th Air Assault Brigade for really the course of over a year now. And so far, they've been able to hold on to the village itself and prevent attacks on the flanks as well. And we have a video here linked on my map of what appears to be a Russian T-80 tank firing onto Ukraine forward positions located within in this plantation over here. And this gives us an idea of where the line of contact truly is, because you have these Ukrainian groups that were trying to set up positions in the area and they were fired upon by a forward Russian element. So in all likelihood, this is where the line between the two forces is located. Now, going a bit to the north to look at Krasnohorivka in this region, we actually do have some changes to the front line that are relatively recent. And we're going to zoom in on this rail line over here. This is a rail line that runs into Krasnohorivka. Krasnohorivka is one of the, if not the most fortified city on this entire line around the city of Donetsk. And if you zoom in, you'll see that along the rail line, the Ukrainians have a massive amount of trenches and dugouts located within the windbreaks that are adjacent to the rail line itself. So that's a big part of why the Russians have been unable to advance over here for so long. They have to methodically clear out every single trench. So that's what they did recently. And there's a video here that I'm going to show you guys about it. So in this video, I'll start it, and you can see that at the beginning, there's Russian artillery strike on the Ukrainian positions and on the fields around it. Then you have the Russian vehicles that dismount these groups of Russian forces, this motorized infantry. They make it into the windbreak, and then you can see as the video goes on, they're walking through it before entering the trench itself. And I'm not sure if there are Ukrainian forces present in the area, but either way, it does prove to us that the Russians were able to advance over here. And comparing it to the previous line, I would say that like maybe they advanced a couple dozen meters. So we're talking about very, very small numbers here. In this video, you could see that the Russian forces are shelling the Ukrainians that are trying to organize a unified group of forces in order to conduct attacks further south in the direction of Opitny. In this video, the Ukrainian forces are operating in the fields and in the hedgerows to the north of the village. And this is 4 minutes long, so I'm not going to show the entire thing, but you get an idea of where the Ukrainians are located and where the Russians are shelling over them. So this is the general area where there's targeting of the Ukrainian forces. And based off of that, we can say that the Ukrainians do have a presence in some of the areas to the north of the village, more so than we previously thought. But what I will say is that Russia does have control of Opitny at the moment. About a month ago, there were reports of Ukraine attacking this direction. They did actually attack, but they were unable to take it over fully. And the Russians have now solidified control over the village. The Ukrainians are trying to send in their forces into the area to the north of it, and they want to feel comfortable enough in order to create a situation where they'll be able to amass enough forces in order to storm the village itself. Now, moving on to Bakhmut's southern flank, in this region, we've seen a decrease in the ferocity of the fighting, I'd say. We're also seeing a decrease in the territorial changes, of course, since the Ukrainians took over the villages of Klishivka and Andriivka. But at the same time, there are reports from both sides mentioning an increase in fighting in the direction of Kurdyumivka. And this makes complete sense because Ukraine's next logical objective in this region is to attack towards Kurdyumivka and take it over, because the Ukrainians already control heights that are to the west of Klishivka and to the west of Andriivka. We've talked about this numerous times. The last set of heights that they have not taken over yet in this entire region to the east of the Donbass Canal is the height area that is around Kurdyumivka and a bit to the east of it as well. And that includes other villages like Zelenopilia, and all of these positions that I mentioned that Ukraine either is aiming to take over or already take over, they overlook the Russian positions that are located on this highway that is to the south of Bakhmut. So that's the Ukrainian rationale for their activities in this region. But right now, the dividing line is still the rail line, although, as I've said before, the Russians don't have that many resources located on the rail line, of course, because it is so close to the Ukrainian positions. They do still have some forces located under the rail line in like these bunkers and tunnels. But for the most part, they moved out the majority of their forces to other villages that are further east. Either way, the Ukrainians now, they're trying to find a way to break through the rail line. And according to Wargonzo, so a pro-Russia source, the Ukrainians are trying to break through over here where the arrow is located and then bypass the village of Kurdyumivka and attack Zelenopilia directly in efforts to flank the village of Kurdyumivka and try to squeeze out the remaining Russian forces in this region. We already know that the Ukrainians are trying to increase their pressure on the northern outskirts of the village in order to take over the fortifications that Russia built up, because they did have some time to build up fortifications to the north of the village, because the fighting in Andriivka and Klishivka, it took a couple of months, so in that time the Russians had time to prepare. And we also know that the Ukrainians are increasing their presence on the other side of the canal, to the west of the canal, like in this area over here, where they already have positions located in basically a water pump station before the war, and now the Ukrainians are using it as an observation post, although it was hit by the Russians previously. Now, in terms of the Russian groupings in this area, you have this Chechen unit located over here. You have motor rifle regiment. You have this motorized rifle brigade operating generally in this area, and then you have elements of the VDV. Meanwhile, on Bakhmut's northern flank, there are reports that started circulating on September 24th that the Russian forces were able to at least enter Orikhovo-Vasylivka. There were a lot of claims of the capture of the village. And then on September 28th, we actually got video footage showing what was alleged to be a Russian soldier entering the village of Orikhovo-Vasylivka. And you could see in the video that he's passing through a red house. So it was claimed that this is the red house at the beginning of the village. So here's that video for you guys. I'll click on it so you guys can see. In the video, the Russian soldier, he's passing by this house, you can see. And the reason why I'm skeptical of this geolocation, it could be possible, I'm not exactly sure, but the reason why I wouldn't say 100% that it's true is because you can't see a structure in the background. You could go back to this frame over here, actually. I'll show you guys a specific location. And you can see over here, there's a structure in the background, which could perhaps be the structure that is shown on Google Maps. And I'll show the satellite imagery to back this up. But for this to be the correct geolocation, we would have to see a proof that this structure is present right behind the red house. And I'm not sure if what I showed you guys in the actual video behind the red house is enough to prove that. And by the way, if the Russians were actually able to break through and enter the village of Orikhovo-Vasylivka, I do think that we would have seen more footage by now, because the Russians, during the entire Bakhmut operation, they posted so many videos from the villages. They took over Berkivka, Paraskovivka, all these villages, and I was covering it at the time, so I know. They posted every single movement they had. And maybe that's a Wagner thing, but still, it would be good PR for them to show it. And so far, we haven't seen anything like that. Either way, I'm not disputing the fact that Russia did try to at least attack in this direction. This was confirmed by Ukrainian sources as well on September 24th. And at the same time, the Ukrainians also tried launching their own attacks along the E40 highway, which is something they've been trying to do for a while now with the help of the 30th Mechanized Brigade. And they've been trying to push on Bakhmut's northern flank in the direction of the supply lines that connect to basically the road system that enters Bakhmut. So you had this one incident where the Ukrainians sent in 2 BMPs, one retreated, and the other one was disabled due to shelling from the 200th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade, which is also a unit that Russia has located in this region. Additionally, a lot of the units that would be involved in any sort of operation around Orikhovo-Vasylivka for the Russians include the 98th Air Assault Division, and there's a few other VDV elements located in this region. And what I find to be very interesting is that in recent days, there's been a lot of reports from Wagner affiliated channels, and they've been claiming that elements of Wagner units have been moved to the line to the north of Bakhmut, to like this sector over here, and that they're engaging in fighting in the villages of Orikhovo-Vasylivka. Again, we talked about that. And then also in Vesele, which is interesting because I haven't seen any sort of external proof to back up the claim that Russia's advanced around here, but that's what they're claiming. And This is also very interesting because the same Wagner affiliated channels, they're saying that thousands of Wagner fighters are being moved back to the front line. Most of them are still on the rear bases, some of them in rear camps on the Bakhmut sector, others on the southern sector, others in the Liman direction. But some of them already being engaged on the front line. That's what these Wagner channels are saying, and they're saying that it's in thousands. I can back that up, but that's their claim. Now, what's even more interesting is that yesterday, Putin, he met with Andrei Troshev, and he is a founding member and executive director of Wagner PMC. Nowadays, he works in the Russian MOD, and most likely this meeting was an effort by Putin to show that he does have full control of the operations of Wagner at the moment. So I'll show some of the highlights over here. The video is linked in the description. In the video, Putin tells Troshev that his task is to take charge of what he refers to as volunteer units that will be formed. And what he says is that they will perform these various combat missions. And he says that Troshev already has previous experience doing this, which he would have from the Wagner days. Now, given the fact that he's talking to Troshev, he's not talking about any sort of random volunteer units. He's most likely referring to former Wagner fighters, which would also corroborate a lot of the reports that I was previously talking about the movement of Wagner fighters back to the front line. But what I will say is that these are not the prisoners that were fighting in a lot of the forward echelons of Russia's assaults on Bakhmut. A lot of the core Wagner fighters will be the ones returning, and those are mostly older men, I would say like in their late 30s or early 40s or something in that range, and they usually have some sort of professional experience from their younger years in the army or in special forces. That's usually like the demographic of the core Wagner fighter, and they are not as plentiful as previously was imagined from the previous iteration of the Wagner PMC. When Wagner was really at its height, the estimates for the amount of men they had was around 50,000. And when it comes to the core of Wagner's fighters that have been with them for many years, that's in the low thousands. And so the amount of men that are being moved now will not be enough to launch any sort of Wagner-esque offensive around Bakhmut like we saw before, that was able to really take on, what was it, like dozen Ukrainian brigades, maybe even more, and they were conducting almost all of those combat operations on their own as the Wagner PMC. We can't see the new iteration of the Wagner PMC do that now with the current amount of men that it has, unless something changes in the future. But if it's true that the Wagner elements are now being moved into areas like around Orikhovo-Vasylivka, where most of the fighting that we've seen being conducted is by airborne forces, then it's likely that these thousands of fighters could be used in a supplementary role to assist the regular Russian army with whatever sort of combat they're engaged in. Now, finally, moving on to the Kupiansk front. In this region, we've seen a lot of videos come out recently showing the destruction of bridges that Ukraine has been utilizing to send additional men and additional supplies across the Oskil River, which is the river that separates the Ukrainian rear in the Kharkiv region and the front line, which is split between, Kharkiv Oblast and then parts of it also in Luhansk Oblast on its westernmost outskirts. So these are some very important bridges. And Oskil, compared to some of the other rivers we've been talking about throughout this war, is a bit wider in its width. But either way, these crossings are still very important. We're going to look at 5 different crossings that are reported to be destroyed. In a video that I'll show in a second, there's 4 bridges that are destroyed. So what you'll see here, for instance, is there's just one bridge over here between Sankove and this village, Kurdyumivka. This one was destroyed. There is one over here between the southern outskirts of the city of Kupiansk and then the other part of Kupiansk on the eastern side of the city across the Oskil River. And then within Kupiansk itself, there is one bridge, but it goes over basically the river twice. So you have 2 bridges over there. And then the Ukrainian forces also built another additional bridge to help decrease the pressure on that one bridge to the south that was being fired upon by the Russians so much. So they have 3 bridges. The third one is not shown on the Google Maps imagery, but you could see it in the video footage. What I want to say before showing these videos is that I've been looking at the sector very closely for a couple of months now. And I've seen some of these reports of Russia destroying these bridges a month or a month and a half ago. So I would want to caution people not to think that all this is recent. It's possible that some of these videos of Su-34 bombers, for instance, dropping KH-29, 32, 38 air-ground missiles are recent, but a lot of these are most likely from mid to late August. And think about it. A lot could have happened in that time, and we would not know about it based off of old videos. We would have to look at satellite imagery to see the actual state of the bridges now, and we have to see if the Ukrainians set up a pontoon bridge, which they could do, and I'm sure they've done that many times throughout this war, to connect the gaps within these bridges. So here is the compilation of the footage. You can see the first strike is on the new bridge that was constructed by the Ukrainians. And I think the reason why it was constructed is because the first bridge, the original bridge that is supposed to be basically the one that goes across the Oskil River along the Kupiansk region, was targeted by the Russians earlier on. I think it was like last year in the original Ukrainian attacks on the region. Might have been blown up by the Russians. Then here you have, again, Russian strikes on the bridges within Kupiansk. And then after this, it goes on to what appears to be the bridge that I was talking about before, to the south of Kupiansk. And again, every single one of these bridges is important for the supply for these units, and also in the potential case that there would be a Ukrainian withdrawal. And the thing is, though, if the Ukrainians were to withdraw from here, they don't have that many men across the river in this specific region. There are a few brigades that have mapped on the map in this region, like the 14th Mechanized Brigade, for instance. But they would be able to cross over the bridge most likely in boats, or they just swim across it. We've seen a lot of things similar to that happen. For instance, when they did that across the, I think it was the Severodonetsk River, for instance, when there was the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. This is all most likely a part of Russia's plan to gradually degrade Ukrainian logistics in this region in order to cut off the Ukrainians across the river as much as they can. And the reason why is not because they want to immediately launch an offensive in this region. We don't have enough of an indication of this. I was always doubting the idea that Russia would go on the attack because of other priorities elsewhere. But either way, what we've seen from the past few months of them conducting positional attacks to sort of get the Ukrainian forces to divert forces in this direction, and also to try to get control over local strongholds in order to basically strengthen their position for future operations. I think that's all part of a concerted effort to shape the battlefield, not for now, but probably long term, because this is definitely a Russian long-term objective to take back the Ukrainian positions to the east of the Oskil River. And maybe it will be through force. Maybe they want to force the Ukrainians to evacuate. That's outside the scope of any of our minds. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.